The 10th Tuesday, we talk about marriage. I brought a visitor to meet Maury, my wife. He'd been asking me since the first day I came, when do I get to meet Janine? When are you bringing her? I'd always had excuses until a few days earlier when I called his house to see how he was doing. It took a while for Maury to get to the receiver, and when he did, I could hear the fumbling as someone held it to his ear, no longer able to lift the phone by himself. Hi, he gasped. You doing okay, coach? I heard him exhale. Mitch, your coach isn't having such a great day. His sleeping time was getting worse. He needed oxygen almost nightly now, and his coughing spells had become frightening. One cough could last an hour, and never knew if he would be able to stop. He always said he would die when the disease got to his lungs. I shuddered when the thought of how close death was. I shuddered when I thought how close death was. I'll see you on Tuesday, I said. You'll have a better day then. Mitch? Yeah? Is your wife there with you? She was sitting next to me. Put her on. I want to hear her voice. Now, I'm married to a woman blessed with far more intuitive kindness than I. Although she had never met Maury, she took the phone. I would have shaken my head and whispered, I'm not here, I'm not here. And in a minute, she was connecting with my old professor as if they'd known each other since college. I sensed this, even though all I heard on my end was, uh-huh. Mitch told me. Oh, thank you. When she hung up, she said, I'm coming on the next trip. And that was that. Now we sat in his office, surrounding him in his recliner. Maury, by his own admissions, was a harmless flirt, and while he often had to stop for coughing or to use the commode, he seemed to find new reserves of energy with Janine in the room. He looked at photos from our wedding, which Janine had brought along. You're from Detroit, Maury said. Yes, Janine answered. I thought I taught in Detroit for 1 year in the late 40s. I remembered a funny story about it. He stopped to blow his nose when he fumbled with the tissue. I held it in place and he blew into it weakly. I squeezed lightly against his nostrils and then pulled it off like a mother does a child in a car seat. Thank you, Mitch. He looked at Janine. My helper, this one. Janine smiled. Anyhow, my story. There were a bunch of sociologists at the university, and we used to play poker with the other staff members, including this guy who was a surgeon. One night after the game, he said, Maury, I want to come see you at work. I said, fine. So he came to one of my classes and watched me teach. After the class was over, he said, all right, now would you like to come see me work? I have an operation tonight. I wanted to return the favor, so I said, okay. He took me up to the hospital and he said, scrub down, put on a mask, and get into a gown. And next thing I knew, I was right there next to him, I was beside of him next to the operating table. There was this woman, the patient on the table, naked from the waist down, and he took a knife and went zip, just like that. Well, Maury lifted a finger and spun it around. I started to go like this. I'm about to faint. All the blood, yuck. The nurse next to me said, what's the matter, doctor? And I said, I'm no dang doctor. Get me out of here. We laughed, and Maury laughed too, as hard as he could with his limited breathing. It was the first time in weeks that I could recall him telling a story like this. How strange, I thought, that he had nearly fainted once from watching someone else's illness, now that he was able to endure his own. Connie knocked on the door and said that Maury's lunch was ready. It was not the carrot soup and vegetable cakes and Greek pasta that I had brought that morning from the bread and circus. Although I had tried to buy the softest of foods now, they were still beyond Maury's limited strength to chew and swallow. He was eating mostly liquid supplements, with perhaps a bran muffin tossed in until it was mushy and easily digested. Charlotte would puree almost everything in a blender now. He was taking food through a straw. I still shopped every week and walked in with bags to show him, but it was more for the look on his face than anything else. When I opened the refrigerator, I would see an overflow of containers. I guess I was hoping that one day we would go back to eating a real lunch together, and I could watch the sloppy way in which he talked while chewing. The food spilling happily from his mouth. This was a foolish hope. So, Janine Maury said. She smiled. You're lovely. Give me your hand. She did. Mitch says that you're a professional singer. Yes, Janine said. He says you're great. Oh, she laughed. No, he just says that. Maury raised his eyebrows. Will you sing something for me? Now I've heard people ask this of Janine for almost as long as I've known her. When people find out that she sings for a living, they always say, sing something for us. Shy about her talent and a perfectionist about conditions, Janine never did. She would politely decline, which is what I expected now, which is when she began to sing. The very thought of you, and I forget to do the little ordinary things that you ought to do. It was a 1930s standard written by Ray Noble, and Janine sang it sweetly. Looking straight at Maury, I was amazed once again at his ability to draw emotions from people who otherwise kept it locked away. Maury closed his eyes to absorb the noise. Notes. As my wife's loving voice filled the room, a crescent smile appeared on his face, and while his body was as stiff as a sandbag, you could almost see him dancing inside. I see your face in every flower, your eyes in stars above, and it's just the thought of you, the very thought of you, my love. When she finished, Maury opened his eyes and tears rolled down his cheeks. In all the years I've listened to my wife sing, I'd never heard her the way he did in that moment. Marriage. Almost everyone I knew had a problem with it. Some had problems getting into it, some had problems getting out. My generation seemed to struggle with commitment as if we were pulling, or as if it were an alligator from some murky swamp. I'd gotten used to attending weddings, congratulating couples, and feeling only mildly surprised when I saw the groom a few years later sitting in a restaurant with a younger woman who he introduced as his friend. You know, I'm separated from so and so, he would say. Why do we always have such a problem? I asked Maury about this. Having waited 7 years before I proposed to Janine, I wondered if people my age were just being more careful than those who came before us, or simply more selfish. Well, I feel sorry for your generation, Maury said. In this culture, it's important to find a loving relationship with someone because so much of the culture does not give you that. But the poor kids today, either they're too selfish to take part in a real loving relationship, or they rush into marriage and then 6 months later they get divorced. They don't know what they want in a partner. They don't know who they are themselves. So how can they know who they're really marrying? He sighed. Maury had counseled so many unhappy lovers in his years as a professor. It's sad because a loved one is so important. You realize that, especially when you're in a time like I am, when you're not doing so well. Friends are great, but friends are not going to be here on the nights when you're coughing and can't sleep, and someone has to sit up all night with you, comfort you, try to be helpful. Charlotte and Maury, who met as students, had been married for 44 years. I watched them together now. When she would remind him of his medication or come in and stroke his neck or talk about one of their sons, they worked as a team, often needing no more than a silent glance to understand what the other was thinking. Charlotte was a private person, very different from Maury, but I knew how much he respected her because sometimes when he spoke, he would say, Charlotte might be uncomfortable with me revealing that, and he would end the conversation. It was the only time Maury held anything back. I've learned this much about marriage, he said now. You get tested. You find out who you are and who the other person is and how to accommodate that or don't. Is there some kind of rule of to know if a marriage is going to work? Maury smiled. Things are not that simple, Mitch. I know. Still, he said, there are a few rules I know that are true about love and marriage. If you don't respect the other person, you're going to have a lot of trouble. If you don't know how to compromise, you're going to have a lot of trouble. If you can't talk openly about what goes on between the two of you, you're going to have a lot of trouble. And if you don't have a common set of values in your life, you're going to have a lot of trouble too. Your values must be alike. And the biggest one of those values, Mitch, yes, is your belief in the importance of your marriage. He sniffed and then closed his eyes for a moment. Personally, he sighed, his eyes still closed. I think marriage is a very important thing to do. You're missing a heck of a lot if you don't try it. He ended the subject by quoting the poem he believed in like a prayer: Love each other or perish. This part is a flashback. Okay, question, I say to Maury. His bony fingers hold his glasses across his chest, which rise and fall with each labored breath. What's the question? He said. Remember the book of Job from the Bible? Right. Job is a good man, but God made him suffer to test his faith. I remember. Takes away everything he has: his house, his money, his family, his health, and makes him sick in order to test his faith. Right, to test his faith. So I'm wondering, well, what are you wondering? What do you think about that? Maury coughs violently and his hands quiver as he drops to his side. I think, he says, smiling, God overdid it.